The story starts with the introduction of Gaviel Loken, captain of the 10th Company of the Lunavul's Legion, telling a story about how he was there when Horus slew the Emperor after being cajoled into talking by Tariq Torgadon, captain of the 2nd Company of the Lunavul's Legion, a man of mighty laughter and idiotic tricks. This was a story which Loken had told so many times he could recite it like he had rehearsed it for this specific moment. He was careful that the audience listening to his story understood the irony, like he himself felt some shame about his complicity in the matter. This was a story about how the blood spilled by a misunderstanding led to the great tragedy which led to the great emperor's murder. A tragedy that Logan wanted his listeners to appreciate, but it was the death of Hastur Sejanus, captain of the 4th Company, that grabbed their attention. That and the punchline. The story, according to the warp dilated horologs which would attest, would take place in the 203rd year of the Great Crusade. Loken would always ensure that the time frame of the story was always correct, where his commander-in-chief of the Lunavulls had been granted the title of the War Master after the triumphant conclusion of the Urano campaign, and the Primarch Horus was leading his army anxious to prove his newfound status, especially to his brothers. Then a backstory about the Imperium is introduced, how it was a strange time to be among the stars, how they had been traveling across the galaxy for over 2 centuries at that point in time. It had become too familiar to them. It was the start of a new beginning and also an end. He talked about how the 63rd expedition came across the Imperium by chance. A certain storm, later declared as providential by Malgorst, equally to the War Master, forced them to alter their route, which led them to a system with 9 worlds circling a yellow sun. Detecting their expedition warships on the edges of the system, the Emperor first demanded their occupation and agenda. He then painstakingly corrected their multiple errors in their responses. Then he demanded fealty. He explained how he, the Emperor of mankind, had shepherded his people through the miserable age of the warp storms, through the age of strife, maintaining the rule and law, something he declared was expected of him. He had been keeping the flame of human culture alight through the numbing cold and the isolation of the old night. He vowed to do so till the spread out population of humanity re-established contact, and now he was rejoicing at the fact that the orphans of humanity were returning. He kept his promise. The orphaned humanity would soon be in his embrace, and with their help, he would start his great scheme of rebuilding the Imperium of Man, to stretch it out again across the stars as it was his birthright. Soon they showed him proper fealty as the Emperor of mankind. The commander, quite entertained by all accounts, sent Hastur Sejanus to meet with the Emperor and deliver their greetings. Sejanus was the commander's favorite, not as proud or irascible as Ezekiel Abaddon, the first captain, nor as ruthless as Luke Sedire, captain of the 13th Company, nor even as solid and venerable as Acton Cruz, captain of the 3rd Company. Sejanus was considered as the perfect captain, tempered evenly in all aspects, equal part warrior and diplomat. Sejanus' martial record was second only to Abaddon's, easily forgotten when in company with the man himself. A beautiful man, Logan would say, building his steel, a beautiful man adored by all. No finer figure in the Mark IV plate than Hastur Sejanus. That is how he was remembered, and his deeds celebrated, even amongst them. Sejanus was considered as the noblest hero of the Great Crusade. That was how Logan would describe him to the eager listeners. In the future, he would be recalled with such fondness that men would name their sons after him. Sejanus, with a squad of his finest warriors from the 4th Company, traveled to the in-system in a gilded barge and was received for audience by the Emperor at his palace on the 3rd planet and killed. murdered, hacked down on the onyx floor of the palace as he stood before the emperor's golden throne. Sejanus and his glory squad, consisting of Deimos, Melsander, Gorthoi, and the rest, were all slaughtered by the emperor's elite guard, the so-called Invisibles. Apparently, Sejanus had not offered the correct fealty. Apparently, he had indelicately suggested that there might be another emperor. The commander's grief was absolute. He loved Sejanus like he was his own son. They had war side by side on 100 walls, but the commander, always calm and wise in such matters, told his men to offer the emperor another chance. The commander detested resorting to war and always sought alternative paths away from violence, where such was possible. This was a mistake, he reasoned, a terrible, terrible mistake. Peace could be salvaged, this emperor could be made to understand. It was about then, Loken added, that a doubt began to appear around the emperors. It was determined that a second embassy would be dispatched. This time Malgohurst volunteered at once. The commander agreed, but ordered his spear tip into assault range. The intent was clear. One hand outstretched for peace and the other a fist. If the second embassy failed or was similarly met with violence, the fist would be in a position to strike. That day, Loken would say, the honor of being the spear tip fell by the customary drawing of lots to the sons of Abaddon, Togardan, little Horus Aximand, and Loken himself. At the order, battle musters began. The ships of the spear tip slipped forward, running under the heavy bombardment. On board, stormbirds hauled onto their launched carriages. Weapons issued and certified, oaths of the moment sworn and witnessed, armor machined into place around the anointed bodies of the chosen. In silence, tensed and ready to be unleashed, the spear tip watched as the shuttle convoy bearing Malgohurst and his envoys arced down towards the third planet. Surface batteries smashed them out of the skies as the burning scats of debris of Malgohurst's envoy scattered into the atmosphere. The Emperor's fleet elements rose up out of the oceans, out of the high clouds, out of the gravity wells of the nearby moons. 600 warships revealed, armed for war. Abaddon broke through and made a final personal plea to the Emperor, beseeching him to cease hence. His response: an open fire on Abaddon's spear tip. Abaddon relayed a message to the heart of the waiting fleet, informing his commander that it was of no use, and that the foolish impostor will not listen. His commander only replied, "Illuminate him, my son, but spare all you can. The order notwithstanding, avenge the blood of my noble Sejanus. Decimate this emperor's elite murderers and bring the impostor to me." And so, Loken stated with a sigh, "We made war upon our brethren, lost in ignorance." The story returns to the time of the war, now seen from the eyes of Loken. A late evening, but the sky filled with light. Towers of the high city, built to turn and follow the sun with the windows during the day, shifting uneasily at the pulsating radiance from the heavens. Spectral shapes swimming high in the upper atmosphere, ships engaging into the mass, charting brief nonsensical zodiacs with the beams of their battery weapons. On the ground, across the huge wide basalt platforms that skirted the palace, gunfire flew through the air, posing coils of laser fire, dipping and slithering heavily like snakes. Dice-rate zips of energy that vanished as soon as they appeared, and flurries of bolt shells like a blizzarding hail, downed stormbirds, crippled and burning, all across the 20 square kilometers of the landscape. Black humanoid figures paced slowly across the grounds of the palace. They were shaped like armored men, crushed like them, but they were giants, each one 140 meters tall. These were the Mechanicum's Titan war engines, which had been deployed around half a dozen of them. Around the Titan's soot black ankles, troops marched forwards in waves 3 kilometers wide. The lunar wolves surged like the flowing water. Thousands of gleaming white figures are bobbing and running forward across the platform, detonations bursting between them. All the fireballs and trees of dark brown smoke, each blast marking a ground with a gritty thump and showered down the dirt as an after effect. Assault crafts flied overhead at low altitude in between the shambling frames of the white titans, fanning the slowly lifting smoke clouds into sudden energetic vortices. Every Astarte helmet was filled with chatter, snapping voices, chopping back and forth, their tones roughened by the transmission quality. It had been Loken's first raid of a massive war since Olano. The same with the 10th Company. They had been involved in some skirmishes and scraps, but nothing that pushed them this far. Loken was glad to see that his allies hadn't grown rusty. The unapologetic regime of live drills and punishing exercises he maintained had kept them sharp and serious as the terms of the oath that they had taken just hours before. Olano had been glorious, a hard, unsparing slog to dislodge and overthrow a bestial empire. Their foes, the Greenskins, had been a dangerously resilient foe, but their pushback only made them stronger, the flames of war reveling in the conflict. The commander had won the field through the use of his favorite strategy, a spear-tip thrust to tear out the throat, ignoring the greenskin masses, which had outnumbered the Crusaders 5 to 1. The commanders had struck directly at the overlord and the ones under his direct command, leaving the enemy headless and directionless. The same philosophy operated here. Tear out the throat and let the body spasm and die. Loken and his men and the war engine that supported them were the blades of the spear and sheathed for that purpose. But this was not Olano. No thickets of mud and clay-built ramparts, no ramshackle fortresses of bare metal and wire, no black powder, airburst, or howling folk voices of the ogres. This was not a barbaric brawl determined by blades and upper body strength. This was modern warfare in a civilized place. This was man against man, inside the monolithic precincts of cultured humans. The enemy possessed ordnance and firearms that matched those of the Legion's forces, complete with the skill and training to use them. Through the green imaging of his visor, Loken saw armored men with energy weapons ranging against them in the lower courses of the palace. He saw tracked weapon carriages, automated artillery, nest of 4 or even 8 automatic cannons shackled together on platforms that walked forward on their hydraulic legs. This wasn't like Olano at all. That had been an ordeal. This was a test. Equal against equal, like against like. Except for all its martial technologies, the enemy lacked one essential quality. And that quality was locked within each and every case of the Mark IV power armor. The genetically enhanced flesh and blood of the Imperial Astartes, modified, refined, post-human. The Astartes was superior to anything they had met or would ever meet. No fighting force in the galaxy could ever hope to match the Legion, unless the stars went out and madness ruled. and lawful sense turned upside down. For Cedere had once said, "The only thing that can beat an Astarte is another Astarte." And at that, they all laughed. The impossible was nothing to be scared of. The enemy, their armor a polished magenta, trimmed in silver, as Loki later discovered when he viewed them without his helmet, firmly held the gates of the inner palace. They were big men, tall, thick through the chest and shoulders, and at the peak of fitness, not one of them, not even the tallest, came up to the chin of one of the Lunawals. It was like fighting children, well-armed children, to be exact. Through the billowing smoke and jarring detonations, Loken held the veteran four squad up the steps at a run. The plasty soles on the boots grating the stone floor. The first squad of the 10th Company, Hellbore Tactical Squad, gleaming giants in pearl white armor. The insignia, the Wolfhelm, stark black on the auto-responsive shoulder blades. As crossfire zigzagged around them from the defended gates up ahead, the night air shimmered with the heat, distortion of the discharging weapons. Some kind of upright, automated motor was casting a sluggish, flaccid stream of fat munition charges over the head. Loken heard his brother Sergeant Jubal instruct over the radio to kill it. Jubal's order was given in the curt argot of Athonia, their derivation world, a language that the Lunar Wolves had preserved as their battle tongue. The battle brother carrying the sword's plasma cannon obeyed without hesitation. For a dazzling half a second, a 20-meter ribbon of light linked the muzzle of his weapons with the automotor. And then the device engulfed the facade of the palace in roasting fires of a yellow flame. Dozens of enemy soldiers were engulfed by the blast. Several were thrown up into the air, landing, crumpled and boneless on the flight of the steps. Jubal barked to get into them. As the wildfire chipped and pattered off their armor, Loken also felt the distinct sting of it. Brother Callens stumbled and fell, but righted himself again, almost immediately. Loken saw the enemy scatter from their charge. He raised his bolter. His weapon had a gash in the metal of the foregrip, a legacy left by a greenskin axe during the battle on Ulanor. A cosmetic mark, Loken told the armorers not to fix. He began to fire, not on burst, but on single shot, feeling the weapon buck and kick under his palm. Bolter rounds were explosive, penetrators. The men he hit popped like blisters or shredded like an exploded fruit. Pink mist fuming off every ruptured part of the figure as it fell. Loken shouted for the 10th Company to move forward in the name of the War Master. That war cry still felt unfamiliar, just another aspect of the newness. It was the first time Loken had cried it out in a war. The first chance he had since the honor had been bestowed by the Emperor after Ulanor. By the Emperor, the true Emperor. The wolves chanted, "Looper, call," as they streamed in, choosing to answer with the old cry, the Legion's pet name for the beloved commander. The war horns of the Titans boomed. They stormed the palace. Loken paused by the gates, urging his front-runners in, carefully reviewing the advance of his company's main force. Hellish fire continued to fire upon them from the upper balconies and towers. In the far distance, suddenly, a dome of light lit the sky, astonishingly bright and vivid. Loken's visor automatically dimmed to protect his eyes. The ground trembled and a noise like a thunderclap reached him. A capital ship of some sort, stricken and ablaze, had fallen out of the sky, impacting in the outskirts of the high city. Drawn by the flash, the photographic towers above him fidgeted and rotated. Reports flooded in Axon's force, the Fifth Company. They had secured the regency and the pavilions of the ornamental lakes of the west of the high city. Torgodon's men were driving up through the lower town, slaying the armor sent to block them. Loken looked towards the east, 3 kilometers away, across the flat plane of the basalt platforms, across the tide of the charging men and striding titans, and an intertwined fire. It was Abaddon's company, the first company, crossing the bulwarks into the far flank of the palace. Loken magnified his view, resolving hundreds of white armored figures pouring through the smoke and fire. At the front of them, the dark figures of the first company's foremost Terminator squad, the Justinian. They wore polished black armor, dark as the night, as if they belonged to a certain another Black Legion. He reported to the first company that the 10th had gained entry. A pause, a brief distort, then Abaddon's voice answering, whether he was trying to shame him with his diligence. Loken denied. There was a strict hierarchy of respect within the Legion. Though he was a senior officer, Loken regarded the peerless first captain with awe. All of the Monovel, which was the higher ups, although Torgarden had always favored Loken with genuine shows of friendship. But now Sejanus was gone. The hierarchy of the Monovel would soon change. Abaddon replied with a deep voice that some of his words were blurred by the radio, that he was just messing around, and that he will meet at the feet of the false emperor. The first one who reaches the emperor gets to illuminate him. Loken tried to hold back a smile. Ezekiel Abaddon had seldom come in contact with him. He felt blessed, elevated. To be a chosen man was enough, but to be in with the favored elite, that was every captain's dream. Reloading his weapon, Loken entered the palace through the gates, stepping over the tangled corpses of the enemy. The plasters of the inner walls cracked and blown apart. Loose crumbs like dry sand crunched under his feet. The air was full of smoke, and his visor display jumping from one item to another in its attempt to compensate and get a clean reading. He moved down the inner hall, hearing the echoes of gunfire from deep within the palace. He noticed the body of a brother slumped in a doorway to his left. A large white armored corpse, odd and out of its place amongst the smaller bodies of the enemy. Marjax, one of the Legion's apothecaries, bent over him, glanced up as Loken approached, shaking his head. Loken asked who the brother was. Marjax replied with Tibor of the second squad. Loken frowned as he saw the head wound that had stopped Tibor. The Emperor knows his name, Loken said. Marjax nodded and reached into his pockets to get the deductor tool to recover Tibor's precious gene seed, so that it might be returned to the Legion banks. Loken left the apothecary to his work and pushed forward into the hall. In a wide colonnade ahead. The walls they decorated showed familiar scenes of a haloed emperor upon a golden throne. Loken, Loken thought about how blind the people of this planet were and how sad it was. One day, one single day with the iterators, and they would have understood. They were not the enemy, they were the same as them, and they brought with them a glorious message of redemption. The old night is over. Man travels the stars again, and the might of the Astartes walked beside them to keep them safe. In a broad, sloping tunnel covered with silver, Loken caught up with the elements of the third squad. Of all the units in his company, third squad, Locusta Tactical Squad, was his favorite and his favored. Its commander, Brother Sergeant Nero Vipers, was his oldest and truest friend. Vipers asked how Loken's humor was. His pearl white plate smudged with soot and streaked with blood. Phlegmatic, he replied, asking about Nero himself. Choleric, dead rage in fact. He had just lost a man and two more of his were injured. There was something covering the junction ahead, something heavy, with an unimaginable rate of fire. They exchanged ways to get rid of it, but to no effect. Only issue was that they had no idea where the weapon in question was. Loken asked who was down. Vipers shrugged. He was a bit taller than Loken, so he shrugged made the heavy ripping and plates of his armor clunk. Zacchaeus, he replied. In disbelief, Loken tried to deny it. Vipers continued that Zacchaeus was torn into shreds before his very eyes, and he felt the hand of the ship on him. The hand of the ship, an old saying, the commander's flagship called the Vengeful Spirit, and in times of duress or loss, the wolves like to draw upon all that implied as a charm, a totem of retribution. Vipers growled that in the name of Zacchaeus, he would find the bastard invisible and Loken tried to calm him down because without him they would be useless, and told him to see to his wounded while he took care of the attacker. Vipers agreed and took his men. Loken pushed past them to the disputed junction. This is where we see Loken's ability as an Astartes. He noticed brother Zacchaeus, his body unretrieved, lying in pieces in the center of the crossway, a steaming pile, shattered wild plasteel and bloody meat. Vipers was right. There was no sign of the enemy. No heat trace, not even a flicker of movement. While studying the area, he noticed a heap of empty shell cases, glittering brass, that had spilled out from behind a bulkhead across him. Thinking that where the killer was hiding, Loken picked up a chunk of fallen plasterwork and lobbed it into the open. A click, a hammering, the hammering fire of the auto fire of an auto fire raved across the junction. 5 seconds, and in that 1,000 rounds were fired. Logan saw the fuming shell cases being spit out from behind the bulkhead as they were ejected. Firing stopped. The smoke of the guns fogged the junction. The gunfire had scored streaks of cracks across the stone floor, hitting Zakia's corpse in the process. Spots of blood and scraps of tissue spattered out. He waited. He heard a whine and the metallic clunk of an autoloader system. He read the weapon's heat, fading, but no body warmth. Vipers approached him, asking if he had earned a medal yet. Loken replied that it was just an automatic sentry gun. Vipers was relieved because with the amount of grenades that they had pitched in towards the gun, he was beginning to wonder that if the so-called invisibles might also be invulnerables as well. He would just and that he would call up some devastator support, but Logan stopped him, only asking for a light flare, which Vipers gave it to him from his leg plate. Loken ignited it with a twist of his hand and threw it down the hallway opposite to him. It bounced, fizzling, glaring white hot, past the hidden gun. A grind was heard, and soon the gunfire followed. Loken began to run. He crossed the junction and hit shoulder first into the bulkhead while the gun was still blazing. He wheeled around and saw the sentry built into an alcove, a squat machine on 4 pad feet and heavily plated. The 8 short, fat, pumping cannons were away from him, focusing on the flickering flare. Loken reached over and tore out the handful of its parts. The guns stuttered and died. Clear, Loken called, as the Locusta moved. Vipers remarked, saying that something like that is generally called showing off. Loken led Locusta up the corridor and entered a fine apartment. Another apartment chambers, similar, called them out. It was oddly still and quiet. Which way? Vipers asked. Towards the Emperor, was the reply. Just like that, Vipers nodded. That's when Loken said that. That's when Loken mentioned about the bet between him and the first captain. Vipers was amused, asking since when had Loken been on talking terms